Imagine a vast continent, cut off from the rest of the world for tens of thousands of years, Australia. While great religions like Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, and Hinduism spread across continents, they never reached this isolated land until recent centuries. But does that mean Australia was without religion? Or does it reveal something deeper about the nature of the divine, whether faith spreads by divine will or by human journeys of trade, conquest, and migration? In this video, we explore why global religions never made it to ancient Australia and uncover the unique spiritual traditions that thrive there instead. Religion is often assumed to be a universal feature of humanity, one that spreads across mountains, deserts, and oceans with an almost unstoppable force. Christianity marched with empires, Islam rode on the wings of trade and conquest, Buddhism traveled with monks along the Silk Road, and Hindu traditions diffused through South and Southeast Asia. Wherever people went, religion seemed to follow. Yet one great exception stands out: Australia. For tens of thousands of years, the continent remained untouched by the world's great religions, until European colonization in the late 18th century. This fact raises a provocative question. Was Australia too segregated from the world for religion to reach it, or is religion not as divine and universal as many assume? To answer this question, we must dig into three overlapping layers: geography and history, which explain why outside religions failed to arrive; indigenous spirituality, which challenges the assumption that Australia was without religion; and theological reflection, which probes whether divinity requires global reach or whether the sacred reveals itself differently in different lands. 1. Geography as the silent wall. The first and most straightforward reason why global religions never made it to Australia before modern times is geographic isolation. Unlike Africa, Asia, or Europe, where cultures and faiths mingled across land borders, Australia became an island continent after the last ice age. 1.1. The deep time of separation. Around 65,000 years ago, the first humans reached the Australian landmass, most likely through Southeast Asia during lower sea levels. After sea levels rose about 10,000 years ago, Australia was cut off from surrounding regions by vast stretches of ocean. For tens of millennia, there was no continuous two-way flow of people, ideas, or goods comparable to the Silk Road, the Indian Ocean trade routes, or trans-Saharan caravans. This isolation meant that the mechanisms that spread religions elsewhere, missionaries, merchants, armies, simply could not cross. 1.2. The absence of trade routes. Religions like Islam and Buddhism spread across seas through Indian Ocean networks. Arab traders reached East Africa, India, and even Indonesia by the early centuries of the Common Era. Hinduism and Buddhism shaped the great civilizations of Cambodia, Thailand, and Java. Yet these trade winds and shipping routes rarely extended as far as Australia. While some evidence suggests limited contact between northern Aboriginal groups and Macassan traders from Sulawesi, Indonesia, before European arrival, this exchange was too small and recent, roughly 17th century, to carry organized religions deeply inland. 1.3. Nature of contact. Even if occasional outsiders landed on Australian shores, they would have encountered a continent with its own social structures and spiritual systems. Unlike societies oriented around kingdoms or large cities, Aboriginal Australia consisted of hundreds of clan-based groups with localized traditions. Missionary religions typically spread in contexts where they could appeal to rulers, urban elites, or merchants who then carried faith further. In Australia, there were no imperial centers for foreign religions to latch onto. 2. The myth of no religion. To say that religion never made it to Australia risks reinforcing a myth that Aboriginal peoples were without religion. In fact, nothing could be further from the truth. Indigenous Australians preserved one of the world's oldest continuous spiritual traditions, the dreaming or dreamtime. This system not only counts as religion, but also challenges Western categories of what religion is. 2.1 The Dreaming as Sacred Worldview. The dreaming refers to the time of ancestral beings who shaped the land, created humans, established laws, and imbued every rock, tree, and river with sacred significance. Unlike religions with written scriptures, the dreaming was preserved through oral stories, songs, dances, and rituals. It was not separate from life, but interwoven into hunting, kinship, law, and geography. Key features include ancestral beings, powerful entities who formed the land and continue to inhabit it. Sacred geography. Every place carries a story. A mountain may be a resting ancestor, a waterhole the site of a cosmic battle. Law and morality. Ethical conduct, social rules, and kinship obligations derive from sacred stories. Continuity. The dreaming is not only a past event, but an ever-present spiritual reality. 2.2 Comparison with world religions. In many ways, Aboriginal spirituality parallels other faiths. Like Hinduism, it links humans to cosmic cycles and sacred geography. Like Judaism, it contains laws given by ancestors akin to divine commandments. Like Christianity or Islam, it speaks of sacred beings who shape existence. What makes it different is its non-universal nature. It was never about converting others. Its authority came from connection to land and lineage, not from spreading a message worldwide. Thus, when outsiders say religion never reached Australia, they often mean organized missionary religions didn't, not that the continent was spiritually barren. 2.3 Resilience and Continuity. Remarkably, Aboriginal spiritual traditions survived tens of thousands of years without writing, central institutions, or expansionist ambition. In fact, many scholars argue that Indigenous Australians practiced one of the longest continuous religious systems in human history. This persistence itself challenges the assumption that divine truth must spread everywhere in order to be authentic. 3. Why didn't missionary religions arrive earlier? Even with isolation, one might ask, if religions like Islam or Christianity are divinely ordained for all humanity, why did divine providence not arrange their arrival earlier? This question shifts the discussion from geography to theology. 3.1 Human agency versus divine will. From a historical perspective, religion spread because of human action. Missionaries traveled, empires expanded, traders carried faith along with goods. From a theological perspective, many believers claim their faith spread because God willed it. Yet Australia remained untouched until 1788. Does this imply divine will excluded Australia, or that geography set boundaries God did not override? This tension exposes a deeper mystery, the balance between human history and divine universality. 3.2 Alternative theological views. Christian perspective. Some argue that God revealed himself universally, but people only received the gospel when human history allowed. Others say Aboriginal spirituality was itself a preparation for later Christian revelation. Islamic perspective. The Quran teaches that God sent prophets to every people. From this view, Aboriginal Australians may have received divine messengers unknown to outsiders, their teachings later absorbed into dreaming traditions. Pluralist perspective. Religions are diverse expressions of the sacred. From this standpoint, Aboriginal traditions were as valid as any other, meaning religion did reach Australia. It just looked different. 3.3 The limits of universalism. The fact that Christianity or Islam did not reach Australia for thousands of years forces a re-evaluation of claims to universality. If a religion truly depends on physical human carriers, then its spread is historical, not miraculous. Geography becomes as decisive as theology. Australia shows that even the most divine faiths were subject to winds, ships, and politics. 4. Colonization and the arrival of world religions. When Europeans arrived in 1788, they brought Christianity with them, establishing it as the dominant institutional religion. Later, migrations introduced Islam, Afghan Cameliers in the 19th century, Buddhism, Hinduism, and Sikhism through Asian communities. In less than 2 centuries, Australia transformed from a land untouched by global religions to a multi-faith society. Yet this arrival also brought profound disruption. Missionaries often sought to replace Aboriginal spirituality, dismissing dreaming as superstition. Sacred sites were desecrated, rituals banned, and children removed from families in attempts to Christianize Indigenous peoples. Despite this, Aboriginal spirituality endured and remains a vibrant force today. Thus, religion did eventually make it to Australia, but not by divine inevitability. It came through colonization, migration, and globalization. 5. The philosophical question: is religion divine or human? The heart of the question, is religion so divine it couldn't make it to Australia, touches on the nature of religion itself. 5.1 If religion is divine. If religions are divine revelations meant for all humanity, their absence in Australia until modern times raises puzzles. Why would God allow tens of thousands of years without the true faith? Did Indigenous Australians live outside divine grace until colonization? Or did God reveal himself in forms outsiders failed to recognize? 5.2 If religion is human. If religions are human cultural creations, then their absence from Australia is no mystery. Religions spread through trade, empire, and contact. Australia's isolation simply prevented human carriers from arriving. Aboriginal spirituality demonstrates how humans everywhere independently generate sacred systems without outside influence. 5.3a Middle Path. Perhaps the most nuanced view is that religion is both divine and human. The sacred does reveal itself, but always through the medium of culture, geography, and history. Thus, Australia was not excluded from divinity. Rather, divinity manifested differently there, in dreaming traditions rooted in land and ancestry. 6. Lessons from Australia's case. Australia's unique history offers several broader lessons about religion and human spirituality. 6.1 Universality is not uniformity. Religions do not need to look the same everywhere to be authentic. The dreaming reveals a universal human impulse to connect with the sacred, even if it takes localized forms. 6.2 Geography shapes theology. The spread of religions depends as much on seas, deserts, and mountains as on divine revelation. Sacred truth may be universal, but its pathways are historical. 6.3 Rethinking absence. To say religion never reached Australia misframes the story. It did, just not in the missionary, expansionist forms outsiders expect. Aboriginal traditions show that religion does not need to be global to be profound. 6. For the sacred beyond borders. The divine cannot be confined to particular routes of expansion. If God is truly universal, then Aboriginal spirituality is not a gap, but a testimony that the sacred finds ways to manifest in every land. Australia and the question of divine reach. Religion is often spoken of as a universal force. It crosses mountains, deserts, and oceans, shaping cultures and uniting peoples under shared visions of the sacred. Christianity spread with empires. Islam followed trade and conquest. Buddhism traveled with monks along the Silk Road, and Hindu traditions moved through South and Southeast Asia. From this perspective, religion looks unstoppable, a divine current flowing across human history. Yet one striking exception unsettles this narrative: Australia. For tens of thousands of years, the world's great missionary religions, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, never reached the Australian continent. This absence invites deep questions. Was Australia excluded from divine reach? Was it too geographically segregated for faith to flow in? Or does the sacred reveal itself differently, outside the expectations of global religions? The story of Australia is not one of religious absence, but of religious difference. While global missionary religions failed to arrive until the late 18th century, Indigenous Australians cultivated one of the oldest continuous spiritual traditions on Earth, the dreaming. This essay explores why outside religions never arrived, what Indigenous spirituality reveals about the sacred, and what Australia teaches us about the nature of divine universality. 1. The barrier of geography. The most immediate reason outside religions did not reach Australia is simple: isolation. 1.1. The continental cutoff. Humans first reached Australia roughly 65,000 years ago, during a time of lower sea levels, when passage from Southeast Asia was easier. Once sea levels rose about 10,000 years ago, Australia became fully separated by vast oceans. This isolation lasted for millennia, making Australia unlike Africa, Asia, or Europe, where people and faiths constantly moved across land borders. 1.2. The trade routes that never reached. Religions often spread along trade networks. Islam moved with Arab merchants across the Indian Ocean. Hinduism and Buddhism reached Southeast Asia via traders and sailors. Christianity spread with Roman roads and later with European exploration. But Australia was never integrated into these circuits. Ships from India, Arabia, or China rarely ventured that far south, and those who did seldom engaged in sustained contact. By contrast, Indonesia, Malaysia, and other regions directly absorbed Indian and Middle Eastern influences because they sat on active trade routes. Australia, lying beyond these networks, was left untouched. 1.3. Geography shapes faith. This highlights a larger truth. The spread of religion is not only about divine mandate, but about human movement. Mountains, seas, and deserts matter. Religion may be sacred, but its messengers travel in boats, caravans, and armies. Australia's isolation demonstrates how geography sets the boundaries for faith's expansion. 2. The myth of no religion. When Europeans arrived in 1788, many mistakenly believed that Aboriginal Australians had no religion. This misunderstanding stemmed from a narrow Western definition of religion, expecting scriptures, temples, priests, or formal doctrines. But to mistake difference for absence is to overlook the profound spiritual system that flourished in Australia. The dreaming. 2.1. The dreaming explained. The dreaming refers to the ancestral time when spiritual beings created the world, shaped the land, and gave laws to human communities. These beings did not vanish after creation, but remained present, embedded in sacred sites, stories, and rituals. Key aspects of the dreaming include ancestral beings, supernatural entities who formed mountains, rivers, animals, and people. Sacred geography. Every place is alive with meaning. A rock formation may embody a spirit. A waterhole may hold ancestral power. Law and morality. Social conduct, kinship systems, and taboos derive from dreaming stories. Living time. The dreaming is not only past but present and ongoing, a continual spiritual dimension that shapes life today. 2.2 Comparison with world religions. Though different in form, Aboriginal spirituality resembles world religions in function. Like Hinduism, it connects humans to cosmic cycles. Like Judaism, it provides laws rooted in sacred tradition. Like Christianity or Islam, it speaks of transcendent beings who order existence. What makes it unique is its non-missionary character. The dreaming was not about converting outsiders. It was bound to land and lineage. Its authority came not from universality, but from locality. 2.3 Continuity across millennia. Archaeological and anthropological evidence suggests that dreaming traditions persisted for tens of thousands of years, arguably the longest continuous spiritual practice in human history. This endurance challenges the assumption that divine truth requires expansion. Instead, it reveals that sacred traditions can flourish in stability, rooted in place rather than in spread. 3. Why missionary religions did not arrive. Even with isolation, one might still ask, if missionary religions are divinely ordained for all humanity, why did they not arrive earlier? 3.1 The human factor. Historically, religion spread through human agents: monks, traders, soldiers, missionaries. Without human carriers, even the most universalist faiths remain geographically limited. Christianity reached the Americas with explorers. Islam reached Indonesia with merchants. Buddhism reached China with monks. Australia had no such contact until modern colonization. 3.2 Theological reflections. From a theological angle, the absence is puzzling. Christianity. If salvation depends on hearing the gospel, why were Aboriginal Australians excluded for millennia? Some Christians suggest that God's grace worked invisibly, or that Aboriginal spirituality was a divine preparation for later revelation. Islam. The Quran teaches that prophets were sent to every people. Thus, from an Islamic view, Australia was not excluded. Its ancestral traditions may contain echoes of forgotten prophets. Pluralism. Other perspectives argue that all religions are valid paths to the divine. From this angle, the dreaming was as much a revelation as any scripture. 3.3 Rethinking universality. Australia demonstrates that universal religions are not automatically universal in practice. Their spread depends on ships, empires, and roads. If God truly reveals himself to all, then he must do so in many ways, not just through a handful of missionary faiths. For the arrival of outside religions. When Europeans colonized Australia in 1788, Christianity became the continent's first imported missionary religion. Churches, missions, and schools sought to reshape indigenous spirituality, often dismissing dreaming traditions as superstition. Later, migrants brought other faiths. Islam, through Afghan cameleers in the 19th century. Buddhism, Hinduism, Sikhism, through Asian communities. Judaism, through European migrants. Within a short time, Australia became religiously plural. Yet this arrival came with violence and cultural disruption. Aboriginal sacred sites were destroyed, rituals banned, and communities torn apart under assimilation policies. Still, indigenous spirituality endured, testifying to its resilience. 5. The question of divine reach. The central question remains: does Australia's story reveal a limitation of religion's divine power, or does it reveal the sacred manifesting differently? 5.1 If religion is purely divine. If missionary religions are direct acts of God meant for all humanity, then their absence in Australia raises troubling issues. Why would God delay revelation for tens of thousands of years? Were Aboriginal peoples excluded from divine truth? Or did divine presence take a different form, unseen by outsiders? 5.2 If religion is purely human. If religions are cultural systems, then the absence is unsurprising. faiths spread when people move, and Australia's isolation prevented contact. Aboriginal spirituality is proof that humans everywhere independently generate ways to connect with the sacred. 5.3 A middle path. Perhaps religion is both divine and human. Divinity manifests, but always through cultural and historical circumstances. Geography, politics, and trade shape how divine truths travel. From this perspective, Australia was never excluded. The sacred revealed itself through dreaming traditions, which carried the same weight and truth as missionary faiths elsewhere. 6. Lessons from Australia. Australia's story offers important insights into the nature of religion and the sacred. 6.1 Diversity of expression. The sacred does not appear only in scriptures or temples. It can dwell in songs, dances, and landscapes. Aboriginal spirituality reminds us that religion is not always about doctrines. It can be about relationship with land, ancestors, and community. 6.2 Geography and the sacred. Religions do not spread in a vacuum. Mountains, seas, and trade winds matter. Australia shows how divine revelation, if universal, adapts to the constraints of geography. 6.3 Challenging Eurocentric views. The idea that Australia lacked religion reflects colonial arrogance. Recognizing the dreaming as a sophisticated spiritual system challenges narrow definitions and affirms Indigenous voices. 6.4 Universality without uniformity. If the divine is truly universal, it does not require a single uniform religion to express it. Australia teaches that multiple forms of spirituality can coexist as authentic reflections of the sacred. A sacred difference. The story of Australia is not one of religious absence, but of religious difference. Missionary religions, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, did not reach the continent for tens of thousands of years because of isolation, geography, and the absence of trade networks. Yet during that same period, Indigenous Australians cultivated a spiritual system that is among the oldest and most continuous in the world. Australia's case challenges simplistic ideas of universality. If divine truth must reach all peoples, then it cannot be confined to particular historical religions. Instead, it must manifest in diverse forms, whether in scripture, temple, mosque, or the dreaming sacred landscapes. So, was Australia excluded from divine reach? No, it was already filled with it. The dreaming reveals that the sacred does not need missionaries to exist, nor empires to flourish. The divine is not absent simply because it takes a different form. Australia shows us that the reach of the sacred is not measured by spread, but by depth, and in that sense, it may be one of the most profoundly religious lands on earth. Australia's story reminds us that religion is not just about divine destiny. It's also about geography, history, and human movement. While world religions never reached this isolated land until modern times, its first peoples nurtured one of the oldest continuous spiritual traditions on earth. So, was Australia left out of the divine plan, or was it already deeply connected to the sacred in its own way? The answer may challenge how we think about faith itself. If you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more explorations into history, spirituality, and the mysteries of our world.